Welcome to the sixth set of ideas, the sixth exchange of ideas that we are having. The journey of the mind, exploring its research hypothesis and research methodology, is continuing. How has this journey taken place till now? OECD discovered that it has created social pain. So this is part 3, the third part of the journey of the mind which we are exploring, trying to find out where did the direction of the journey change so that social pain was created. So in this sixth set of ideas, this is the third set which is exploring the journey of the mind. To explore this journey, we are using a Sahana Vavatu approach for such a journey. And this approach starts with a couple of questions. Can there be research without search? Can there be research ethics without ethics? And can there be a research methodology without a method? So in this third part, we are starting the exploration of the method, trying to find the root of the problem before we start the solution. Before we design the course of research ethics which can prevent social pain, we are trying to find out where did the problem start, what was the root of the problem. And this, as far as your PhD thesis is concerned, this session proves that the literature review that you do may continue before deciding a research methodology. The last session began with a disclaimer. We will repeat it here. When we are tracing the history of thought to find out how education got impacted and what were the possible ideas which led to social pain, any such exploration will always have problems, because there is no standard reference for such a search. Now, suppose your research hypothesis faces a similar problem. What will you do if your research also explores a perspective that is different? Like, we are exploring a different perspective, yet this different perspective is needed to solve the problem of your PhD thesis, your research hypothesis. Because inevitably some scholars will not agree with what has been said, as there is no standard reference. Therefore, to avoid any controversy in the next session, 2 sessions, that is this session and the next session, we will not express quotations, but we will not express our views, but we will extensively rely on quotations of scholarly work. So the session may be not so interesting, but it is necessary. It is a necessary evil, because we are just looking at what scholars are saying before we form our own opinion and our own solution. And no opinion or judgment we will offer in these 2 sessions on any institution, any individual, or any academician who is named. Yet the research of the past scholarly work will be used, and we will use it with what methodology, what method? The inner search method, to fulfill the objective of creation of an education curriculum that alleviates social pain. What will you do if your research hypothesis has a firm basis, that it wants to alleviate social pain, find education curriculum. Yet it seems incorrect when you research academics, because academics, you feel, may be using ethics to alleviate social pain, and that ethics may already be used. So we have a research hypothesis of a link between education and social pain that is now evident to all according to OECD. We are assuming that to find a way to solve this using research ethics course, we would just imply that let's add ethics to education and then everybody's behavior will become ethical and all social pain will be resolved. Yet, when we gather information about current education, we find that an emphasis on ethics has already been incorporated. So where does that leave us? Surely we feel we are not wrong because ethics is the need, but the data is not proving us right also, because ethics is already there. Now, if you're doing your PhD research and if the problem is because of data, it can be solved by getting more data. Maybe by changing the research approach, the research strategy, or even the data collection method. But what do you do if the problem is not quantitative? What if your research topic is not quantitative? What if it involves understanding of human beings and why they act the way they are acting? This can emerge from a philosophy or ideas that human beings have. That's why they are reacting the way they are reacting, and this is leading to social pain. Does emergence of such ideas have its seeds in a philosophy that involves concepts of neural networks? As there is so much interest currently in artificial neural networks, can we explore them also? Let us see how an academician who has learnt ancient wisdom find a parallel. A PhD in psychology who graduated from Stanford refers to neural networks as samskaras. She is now a sadhvi and calls them mental impressions and psychological imprints that reflect mind's conditioning. But is it possible to condition the mind differently? We have discussed that study of matter is physics. Then we talked about the role of the mind and made our exploration in this course as a journey of the mind. Where does thought emerge? In the mind. Does it emerge from a philosophy that a computer cannot learn? Will the conditioning of the mind emerge from can we agree that it will emerge from a philosophy? Can you smell or see a rose without the mind? What guides you to avoid the thorn which is next to the rose? What impels you to choose or enjoy the smell and extract? Or that is one approach. When you see the thorn in the rose, if you look at the rose, some people may feel, let me smell it. There is a possibility that some may look at the thorn and say, how can I use the thorn to hurt others? Two different approaches. So what is the philosophy from which you are choosing to see the same reality of a rose and thorn together? We see that in education, the intellect is exposed to ethics. We have seen it in our current, academic curriculum. We have seen it in our previous sessions. But somehow society must not be using ethics. That's why we have all these social problems, the social pain. So finally, as computers are now exploring neural networks, we have come across a new concept given by a PhD in psychology from Stanford, and this concept is samskara. So there is as far our search is going. So why have ideas of ethics imparted by education not been used by humans? We know that in the very foundation of schools they have put these roles which talk about ethics and built the buildings on top of those foundations. But probably those ethics are not being used, which means that this mind matter education somehow is not working out. If we remember, at one time when physics was seen as a study of matter and it was being explored like a study of matter, if at that time we asked, what is mind? The reply would have been, it does not matter. Today we ask, why is matter mostly empty space? And we are told, never mind. So what is this nature of this mind matter education? That either we say, when we ask what is mind, at one time they said it does not matter, and today we say, why is matter empty? And we are told, never mind. Is the lack of a link between the mind and matter in academics the cause why ethics is present in theory and not in the practice of the mind? Why is the intellect not helping out? Is the intellect being guided by neural networks, or what the PhD from Stanford in psychology says, samskaras that can be refined by life experiences? Can we refine these samskaras by life experiences using education? And can such a refinement lead to experiencing a different level of consciousness? Because we are finding that the present state of consciousness is creating social pain. Can education influence these neural networks that influence the intellect to guide the mind to make right choices that reduce social pain? Will such a path awaken the conscience within to help life experiencing a higher consciousness? We decided in the last session, using Saunder's onion rings, to start with philosophy of research. Is this a valid philosophy that examines matter in the context of three things: the mind, the intellect, and transformation of neural networks to achieve human potential? So matter, human mind, intellect, and neural networks. Somewhere the connection between these must have broken down. That's why social pain resulted. Well, it would be fascinating to trace the history of thought itself. We started by saying that if in the very first session, that if we trace the history of thought, we go back to language and we start exploring that. But by now, we have already decided our research hypothesis. The first session is over. After that, we decided our research hypothesis. We have to stick to it. So what's the lesson that we are sharing with you here is, always keep your hypothesis in focus and do not get tempted to a wider or a bigger issue that is equally fascinating. The OECD has, based on its research, identified progress in the last 150 years and linked it to education. Much as you or I are tempted to go to the root of the problem, we can hold it for your postdoctoral research. Stick to your present focus once you have decided it. This is the first lesson when you are following your method. So where do we start? Let us start our hypothesis with what OECD said, and let's look at around 150 years ago. Here we begin by asking whether we need three frameworks to analyze the human journey, that is the body, mind and consciousness. The framework of the body, the framework of the mind and the framework of the consciousness. When we define a problem to explore it over 150 years, it becomes obvious that we cannot use the framework of any one human body, because nobody's thought in a physical body we have seen evolving over 150 years. The body does not last so long. So nobody today seems to know how everybody's ideas have been formed, because many people in many human bodies and with many human minds, different states of consciousness have worked together, and collectively there is a set of ideas which has led to social pain. So has a collective impact of these ideas over past and present impacted the way we are all using the human body today? Do they guide us how to use the mind also, these ideas? And do these ideas recognize consciousness? We have to consider individuals with the ideas they have or have had, and the impact that these have left on a collective human consciousness. Why are prosperity and social pain occurring simultaneously? Does it mean it is possible to have one without the other? That is, it is possible to have prosperity without social pain? What will give evidence? What can give evidence that prosperity is possible without social pain? What ideas will enable it? If we take, say, one small step at a 5-degree angle away from the right path and keep traveling on this deviated path, what will happen? Anyone can guess how far away we'll reach from the right path in 150 years. Imagine then that we are traveling on this path at a fast pace, as society is doing recently. And the faster you go, you must be even more focused on following the right path. So you can imagine you're deviating and then you're deviating and galloping at a fast speed. So what is the distance from the journey? And that is the social pain. Therefore, the idea of transformation of neural networks that was left to education in the hypothesis of OECD, which we are taking forward, seems to have got some virus. To debug it, we trace the journey of the mind backwards. So we try to find and come back to the point where it deviated. So we are tracing the thought back. Just as the spider withdraws in the web, swallows the web to rejuvenate itself. So we are trying to do the same. Trace the thought back over 150 years to find out where was the origin of the problem, and once we know from our method the root of the problem, then we know how to solve it. So we ask ourselves this question next, that do we need 3 time frames for this research? The OECD is already connecting 3 time frames. Its findings are the basis to seek a solution. Their observation spans 2 time frames, past and present. Then they are projecting that their efforts will impact a 3rd time frame, which is the future. What is the one way that we can approach this subject? We will look at causes to identify the problem, because as we said in lecture 1, only by asking the right question will we find the right answer. Therefore, our questions are, we have a set of 5 questions which we are going to repeat very often. So our first question is what? What was the cause of the problem? Was it the inappropriate use of the human mind or the philosophy that guided its neural network? The second question we like to ask is how? How did the problem emerge? The third question we like to ask is when? When did the problem emerge? The OECD has, for our research, identified 150 years as the time frame for the disconnect between prosperity, education and well-being. So they got disconnected. Then we come to our next question. Who? Who suffered? It is obvious that society suffered, and our objective is to alleviate that suffering. The next question we are fond of asking is where? Where did the problem emerge? Now, where's answer may imply, using OECD's analysis, that education is where it occurred and a solution lies in a curriculum design according to us, beginning with research ethics. That's our research hypothesis, and we are going to seek evidence for that. So 4 questions explore the past, while the who suffered covers both the past and the present, when it identifies that who suffered as society at large. The where question explores the past to identify the issues, but OECD's identification of education on its graph now guides the future. That is the design of a new education curriculum. So our ideas in neural networks relating to perception of the body, mind and consciousness, 3 things need to be studied in 3 time frames for a solution: past, present, future. So this is the focus. For this, we look at what was the cause of problems. Now we are inclined in our analysis till now to believe that as the time span of 150 years is too long to identify any one individual with the problem, we cannot say that so and so is the cause of the problem. Therefore, we should stick to ideas, which are the ideas which may have caused problems. However, these ideas are all associated with individuals and their names, and therefore we will have to take some names. So let us make a disclaimer that there is no value judgment about any one person, even if the ideas associated with them seem to be in a different light today. Each person, as a genuine researcher, according to his or her perception of reality at that point of time, did his or her best to contribute to academic thought and its progress. Also, it is impossible to cover all aspects of the work of the people we are going to quote, and some of the aspects of the work that we are quoting, of the people we are quoting, some of the aspects of their work may actually be wonderful and positive. But we are looking at those ideas in their work which may have caused problems. So may not be a good idea to look upon them as villains or of the piece, because some of their ideas may actually have been wonderful. But we do not have time to elaborate all of them, because our analysis deals only with finding out what interpretations changed that angle of academic path. A likely silence on the positive aspects of their sincerity and their work does not imply any criticism. Academic research must never be seen as a blame game. Instead, we are grateful for those deviations because their presence alerts us how to prevent similar deviations in the future. We are going to give a research ethics curriculum. It's there in the book, How to Prevent Recession, part A of the book. So we should know what is the way it can get deviated. How can we lose our way once again? Therefore, we are tracing the thought. Mistaken interpretations of reality are the lessons for the future. They are not criticisms. In the spirit of Sahana Vavatu, we see them as contributing to the expansion of our awareness by telling us how to think carefully, especially when viewing reality. Let us remember that a good research analyzes all assumptions and causes. What if your research is based on an idea that is proved wrong later? Suppose you do all your research and you have based it on some idea, and that very idea, which is the basis of your research, later gets disproved or gets proved wrong. What if that very first basic assumption is not valid? A good researcher examines everything very closely and critically. Only if you are convinced of the basis of your research should you proceed. So what are we doing? Let's apply it to our search and research. We are taking the idea of OECD forward. Can we examine the assumption that their idea is inherently making? Can we see if it has any validity? OECD is stating that despite the spread of education, economic progress in the last 150 years was accompanied by social pain. What is it assuming? It is assuming a link between education and economic progress. This may be obvious, but is it a valid assumption in theory? Will it stand an academic test? Ask yourself such questions for your own research topic, because if nothing else, to develop an inner conviction which becomes a basis of lifelong search and research. So let's look at the education and economic prosperity link and examine historical evidence for it. The OECD has taken the cutoff time of the last 150 years, and in this 150 years it could not find a positive correlation between education and prosperity without social pain. So can we look at a prior time period to see if there is any direct or indirect evidence of a correlation? Even if we get some indirect evidence or some sort of meaningful looking evidence, then we can say yes, there is a basis of accepting this, even though it is obvious. So let's go back to the 14th century. In the 14th century, they developed a very deep interest in the works of Plato, Aristotle, and hundreds of other thinkers to rediscover the genius of the human mind. Universities were set up, and this continued till the 17th century. The University of Idaho states, and I quote, centrally, this period was, by the way, called Renaissance. So I'm quoting the University of Idaho stating, and I quote, centrally Renaissance man learned to see humanity, the human form, intellect and experience as an object of brilliance and beauty rather than of sin. This vision occurred at once in the literal physical sphere and in the psychological sense in a new melding of Greek and Judeo-Christian perception that the human form represented God's own beauty and His love for His most sacred creation, humankind, unquote. So you are seeing 2-3 concepts here. First, that we are not born because of sin. So it's not an original sin that is the cause. So first thing that is being attacked, according to the University of Idaho, is the fact that we are inherently sinners. So living in a guilty conscience or unhappy consciousness is not the way forward, according to the University of Idaho in Renaissance. So is this not near the ancient Indian tradition Satyam Shivam Sundaram idea, that of truth, auspiciousness and beauty as the fundamental things which should guide our vision? What did the Renaissance vision of seeing human form with intellect and experience as an object of brilliance and beauty, unquote, lead to? It led to the Renaissance humanism in art. It transformed ideas of religion, ideas of art, and included philosophy into art. Was such a coming together to learn and grow together a liberating Sahana Vavatu approach, where art began entering philosophy and philosophy started entering into art, religion and the way of life. Just as our research methodology that we are using enters into research ethics, and then together they enter into education so that we can lead life in a manner that does not create social pain. We are expanding exponentially along the same concept, which is the ancient wisdom idea, the Sahana Vavatu idea. So let's look at Columbia. A blog on columbia.edu states, and I quote, "In the Renaissance, painters not only asserted their technical dominance, but also pushed forward the Renaissance ideology, both artistic and religious, which placed artists in the realm of philosophers," unquote. So it's not just technical dominance, it's not just excellence. What they are doing, what the Columbia.edu is saying, that this blog says that artists are becoming philosophers. So you see the idea of experiencing brilliance and beauty in oneself and not viewing oneself as a sinner. You will be what you think you are. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Life is a self-fulfilling prophecy according to certain theories of psychology. So this is the Sahana Vavatu approach. The university also states, and I quote, "Michelangelo shows the full human form of the Father. Not only did he embrace the form, but also he took the liberty of showing the legs and arms of God." Undoubtedly, Michelangelo sought to illustrate the idea that, and I quote, "God created mankind in his own image, in the image of God he created them," unquote, Genesis 1.27. It further states, and I quote, "This interpretation was a radical leap of faith for many Christians," unquote. Did the human mind explore beyond a mechanical interpretation of idea forms in a spirit of togetherness, a Sahana Vavatu style? opening ourselves to ideas and concepts of others to seek together, to express creatively and discover. The Sahana Vavatu approach is about inter-relatedness, interdependence. Is this the evidence? Is this evidence of such an approach being used earlier? Today, in popular understanding, Renaissance is an artistic movement in Europe. If you search anywhere, people will say it's just an artistic movement which happened in Europe. Many, therefore, academicians are not giving it importance. Art emerges from abstract ideas. We say it's an artistic movement, and art comes from abstract ideas that humans have. Our approach is very scientific. And what is a scientific approach? Scientific approach likes precision, absolute precision, while art is abstract. However, the inspiration of scientists may also emerge from abstractions. This is the first interrelatedness to experience and recognize. From the experience of abstraction, the scientists develop their precision. This is also an interrelationship, the Sahana Vavatu, the interconnection, the interrelatedness, the interdependence of the abstract and the precise. What more evidence exists? Let's see. Scholars today believe that Renaissance changed even the political concepts during the time. The university states, and I quote, "It brought with it the seeds of a rebirth in Athenian political concepts of liberty, predicated on reason and the rule of law, in turn based on the right to think for oneself," unquote. This is a very big change in spirit that transforms processes in society. The right to think for oneself. We will see that even the philosophy of the time overshadows scientific interpretation of ideas, of evidence presented. So this is a very big change in spirit and approach. This Sahana Vavatu approach is to discover this spirit together to transform processes in the human mind, turning them towards ethics using the samskara of education. So, is there evidence of transformation of the mind of society during the Renaissance? OECD's expectation from education is to add dimensions of the spirit because it is looking at character, values, etc. Now these dimensions can only emerge by transforming the basis of ideas and motivations that currently drive attitudes and values in humans. Is there evidence of such a transformation that we can take lessons from? Could the interest in ancient wisdom and its philosophy be a guide to the nature of transformation beyond the artist's mind? The University of Idaho's website states, and I quote, "Since 1184, the Inquisition had made it a crime to challenge the Church's authority on any and all religious dogma. Those who translated or read the Bible from any language but Latin were put to death," unquote. In this context, when ideas of individual liberty and freedom to think are added, what the Renaissance did, the university website says, and I quote, "And consider how threatening these were to the existing Catholic and feudal medieval social and political order," unquote. So this is what the university's research is showing. What else did the Renaissance do? The Renaissance from the 14th to 17th century revived interest in ancient wisdom and led to a great creativity not only reflected in European art and architecture. Instead, it was followed by a period of great discoveries and inventions. Were they due to an understanding based on ancient wisdom? If so, What changed academics thereafter? The University of Idaho continues, and I quote, "The Renaissance also sparked or worked in tandem with a renewed interest and ability to comprehend the algebraic and geometric theories that had helped unlock and harness the workings of the physical universe." So without the Renaissance, there would have been no soon following scientific revolution, the Copernicus or Galileo, and thus no Bacon or Newton. Unquote. This is the university saying. But is there a opposing view to this? An opposing view to this is given by Robert Lopez. Robert Lopez says that the economic recession was the cause of the cultural outpouring of the Renaissance. This recession, or the Panic of 1857 in the USA, was more a plague of the mind, according to James Gibbon. The invention of the telegram, Gibbon felt, made the world smaller and spread it faster. Now, will a stable mind help in such a situation when things are happening so fast? They say the speculation in land and railroad during the gold rush in USA was undertaken even by people living in Britain and France, spreading the crisis to Europe. Judith Brown finds that today most economic historians do not subscribe to the economic recession view, while the non-economic ones do. Lopez acknowledges that statistical evidence of this hypothesis is sparse and unreliable. He admits to relying on qualitative elements like spirit of business and what he calls disreputable statistics. He admits that it was impossible to arrive at per capita income and productivity. The Idaho University website admits, and I quote, "This is not to say that most or even many 14th to 16th century European or classical Greeks or Romans were free thinkers or scientific thinkers, but rather those who attempted to do so were often allowed to do so." Unquote. So what is the nature of change that the Renaissance created in human thought, science, and in life? The university states about pre-Renaissance period, and I quote, that there was no medical science at all, and thus no scientific concept of disease, because the very concept of Aristotelian scientific thinking was seen as a threat to faith and biblical revelation. Unquote. And I quote again, "Consider, for example, that it was illegal to examine a human corpse or understand human anatomy or examine the nature of disease. Heck, there wasn't even plumbing throughout Europe because the mathematical and organizational principles necessary to create such technology had been swept aside with the Roman Empire." Unquote. The university is stating this. This is their research. And it calls this as the, and I quote, "the real revolution, a change in human consciousness." Unquote. And I quote again, "Before this era, Michelangelo could not have sculpted the David in part because the technical ability to create a freestanding statue like this had been lost for nearly 1000 years, as had the desire to do so. So the more important reason is that medieval Europeans could not see or understand the human form in this kind of detail, and they could not even begin to grasp the human form as an object of beauty. Until the Renaissance, this way of seeing the human form would have been considered sinful and pointless. Consider how this medieval Christian disregard for human form is also rooted in Neo-Platonism. Unquote. So So a change in human consciousness promotes exploration and scientific ideas. It further states, and I quote, Copernicus 1473 to 1543, Kepler 1571 to 1630, and Galileo's 1564 to 1642, proving the Church's doctrine that the Earth is the center of the universe doesn't just mark the fact that Europeans have rediscovered Greek mathematics and learned how to apply them to the natural world. The real miracle is that these men were capable of even thinking to challenge Aristotle and the Bible, that it even occurred to them that such a thing was possible, and that it even occurred to them that they themselves, mere mortal men, could look up into the sky and into their equations and chart the heavens and explain our place in it. Unquote. The Renaissance touched daily life in many dimensions. This is the togetherness that wisdom-driven creativity is capable of. It touched by creating ice creams and touched food by creating ice creams. It touched reading by creating paperback books. It created men's fashion and men's wear. It created technical drawings, the flying machine, the parachute, the revolving bridge, the armored car, the joint crossbow, the 33-barrel organ, the predecessor of the machine gun, Leonardo's musical instrument, a kind of cross between a violin and a keyboard, the self-propelled car, the paddle boat, etc., etc. Is an irresponsible, greed-driven mindset dangerous in a connected world? The overdraft facility that banks gave was one of the financial innovations of that time. Can the misuse of a facility cause a problem? The 2008 recession was also caused by a misuse of leveraging facility. The housing boom pre-1857 seems similar to the US housing market in pre-2008. Maybe we are speculating. The speculation in railroad looks similar to the stock market crash of 2008. Maybe. The years may be different, but the link of the mind and in an interconnected world are similar. If Lopez's arguments are true, the recession was not caused by the Renaissance, but it emerged due to the recession. The rich and wealthy, he says, moved to the countryside as the industry in Italy suffered due to America's economic panic. They exploited the peasantry there, he thinks. Is there enough evidence to support his belief? The American and UK economy recovered soon after the USA Civil War. The need for ethics seems as relevant then as it appears now to us today. Where does the balance of evidence point to? The Encyclopedia Britannica says, and I quote, during the Renaissance, the European economy grew dramatically, particularly in the area of trade. Developments such as population growth, improvements in banking, expanding trade routes, and new manufacturing systems led to an overall increase in commercial activity. Unquote. Feudalism gradually disappeared. Just as Athenians put Socrates to death, but Plato and Aristotle were allowed to live and teach, the Renaissance saw Galileo arrested, his books banned and burned. Yet Socrates' ideas continue till date due to Plato and Aristotle. Similarly, the world today believes that the earth goes around the sun. This shows OECD has some basis for linking education with prosperity and creativity. The example proves the link between education and prosperity. It cannot be the best case study to state that social pain can be removed, but that our hypothesis is a viable hypothesis stands some test, and we just don't take OECD's word for it. So has our research methodology strayed in our search for a research ethics curriculum? What have we proved by indulging in this deviation? Why have we gone into a storytelling mode about an event in world history? What can the Renaissance tell us about a curriculum designed for research ethics? Had we not decided to use research methodology for a curriculum design of research ethics? Then we decided to use Saunder's approach that we are not familiar with. We are yet to figure out why choose such a methodology in the first instance. When there are so many questions that can be asked but have not been asked, why not ask them yourself? And why not pause to answer them as your research, lest you forget? Remember, the best researcher is his own or her own best critic. Explain choices and methods as you proceed. Keep notes of possible criticism at each step. It must be answered there. Why are we used? So let us criticize ourselves and let us be our own best critic. And ask a question, why are we using Saunder's approach to analyze the problem? Professor Saunders, earlier at Oxford Brookes and currently at Surrey, recommends this approach for business studies. As we are researching past prosperity which emerges in the current understanding from business, we use a research methodology of business studies. Will it help us grasp the opposing point of view of well-being better? Can it expand a business research method by applying it to a larger field showing cooperation of spirit among business and all research, or a Sahana Vavatu in the methodology itself? Can we demonstrate this interlinkage in the methodology? The Sahana Vavatu style in the methodology, using a business research methodology to create, prove a research hypothesis on creating well-being, which the business is accused of not creating. So, can a business studies methodology which has produced progress also be used to derive well-being? That becomes a challenge. Will it prove that concepts that cross disciplines in their use and that their usage is only limited by the minds that apply them? There is nothing wrong in the methodology, the method. If your method is right, it is limited by the mind. The problem will then not be with business or prosperity, but an attitude or lack of values and character in the application of academic concepts which our curriculum will seek to create. Can we, like Niels Bohr in his debate with Einstein, use a business research methodology to arrive at a conclusion of well-being as a goal? Cooperation in spirit of search has no winning or losing. Both seek a higher experience which can benefit all. Both of them were not fighting. The spirit was of search, and that's what we are trying to say. That it was not a verbal duel, there was no winning or losing. They were both discovering. In that spirit of the debate, of Bohr-Einstein debate, we are using a business research methodology to find well-being. So can we thus use the methodology of the opposing point of view to prove the desired point of view, just as Niels Bohr used Einstein's ideas to disprove what Einstein was saying currently? So can we use the methodology of the opposing point of view, that is of business, to prove the desired point of view, that is of well-being? This is the reason why we are using Saunder's research onion rings. So where does this analysis take us in our research methodology to find research ethics in the onion rings? We find that the very first onion ring, the philosophy, have we ignored philosophy while finding where a practice of ethics disappears while creating prosperity. We now find that a revival of interest in philosophy and the idea of Plato, Aristotle, etc. has a relationship with the use of the human mind and the development of ideas. There is now considerable evidence to support it. Thus, the idea of using the methodology of the chosen discipline which we are researching is currently proving useful. Saunder asks us to peel the onion layer by layer, and we find that the outermost layer of, or what we can say the outermost layer or the first layer, depending on where you start from, is philosophy. It is a good starting point to study the creation of prosperity. Will the same starting point be relevant for creating well-being? If enough well-being was not thought to be created, was it due to our using a wrong methodology, or was it due to a not so adequate understanding of philosophy? Or did an emphasis on philosophy as a guide to samskara or education get diluted later? We have seen earlier that does a teacher use the spirit of many methods? Today, in the age of internet, many feel that a teacher is not relevant. You can record and people can learn from the internet. There is Google. But we saw earlier that and asked ourselves the question that does a teacher use the spirit of many methods? Does he immerse himself or herself in the culture of search, that is ethnography, look for a theme to find influences, that is a narrative? Does he or she describe the essence of the activity, the phenomenological way, to find how current tasks or use is done the grounded way, or to find and use all of these to find a way to teach in a manner that transforms students? Has data on Renaissance been gathered over time using many of these research methods, not just one? Have writers during Renaissance and later, those who have written about it, delved into the spirit of the times, immersing in the culture of the search, that is ethnography? Have painters painted using the spirit of religion, finding spirit of God, giving it shape? Is the spirit captured in the narrative, the Michelangelo story? Let me give you a story of the narrative, how it gives the spirit of the time. So Michelangelo was finishing some sculpture, and his friend said that I'm going out. His next door neighbor said, I'm going out, and friend said, I'm going out for a month. So you are working in the garden, so just keep an eye on my house. And Michelangelo said, perfect. I work long hours, so I know who's coming and I'll be able to give the message that you are away for a month. When this neighbor comes back after a month, he looks at the sculpture and says, hey, you are lazy, you haven't done anything. It's exactly how I left it. So what have you done? You haven't even looked after my house probably. So Michelangelo pointed out, you see this little shape here? This is what I have carved out. This little muscle, this little inflection. So those are, he pointed out. And the neighbor said, but these are trifles. What did Michelangelo reply? Trifles make perfection, but perfection is no trifle. This is a narrative. It captures the essence, the spirit of the times, the spirit of work. Has the spirit behind the process of search kindled by philosophy? Is this an experience of scientists and painters? Can we dare say phenomenological? Are we trying a grounded theory of how to use philosophy for current progress, or using it as a case study for planning a path for society today? Who knows? The only point we are making is that the spirit behind the idea brings it to life. in research, in academics, in progress, in science and arts, as well as in society. What is the spirit of philosophy society should seek and apply to experience well-being? How to discover the spirit of research within yourself? Become one with the problem to get to the bottom of the problem. The Sahana Vavatu is a concept of seeking oneness. Can you become one with the problem in your mind? An unending search, an obsession to experience it within. Donald Knuth of Stanford, who's the author of The Art of Computer Programming, and in 1974 he got the ACM Turing Award, which is the informal Nobel Prize for Computer Science. I will quote him, he says, and I quote, "Email is a wonderful thing for people whose role in life is to be on the top of things, but not for me. My role is to be on the bottom of things. What I do takes long hours of studying and uninterruptible concentration," unquote. Professor Cal Newport, who teaches computer science at Georgetown University and is author of Digital Minimalism, Deep Work, etc., I quote him. He says, "The key to living in a high-tech world is to spend much less time using technology," unquote. Peter Drucker also agrees that we need to spend long hours of concentration. Archimedes too became one with the problem. So did the spirit of Renaissance get lost in the processes of thought developed in education? We will pause to reflect on why the education, progress and social pain have been put on one graph by the OECD. It pains us. That's why that pinch is making us framing a research hypothesis. So what has been lost? We all know that many discoveries, inventions, luxuries and comforts have been found. But what has been lost? Can the well-being that has been lost in the race for prosperity be found again by reviving the spirit of education? Can we trace the path where the spirit got lost so that it doesn't occur again? How to know where to search for the spirit, where to find evidence of it, how to interpret and use the evidence? We leave you with this set of questions to share with us your answers and also to share with us other questions that we have not asked but you have asked, and hopefully you have found answers too. So I thank you for your time and attention in this 6th session. Thank you so much.